How long could the last human survive on a generation ship? Imagine waking up inside a spacecraft that was never built for one lifetime. Not a capsule, not a small metal room floating above Earth for a few months. A generation ship, a moving world. A city sealed inside layers of metal, water, soil, machines, storage decks, farms, reactors, corridors, sleeping quarters, medical rooms, and memories from a planet no one aboard may ever see again. Now imagine that everyone else is gone. The ship is still moving, the engines are quiet, but not dead. The air is still breathable. The lights still come on in certain sections. Water still runs through pipes somewhere behind the walls. The gardens still glow under artificial suns. But the classrooms are empty. The command deck is silent. The dining halls are dark. The voices that were supposed to fill the voyage for centuries have faded into recordings, logs, and closed doors. And one person remains. One human being, alone inside a vessel built for generations, crossing deep space at a distance where Earth is no longer a rescue point, no longer a home port, and maybe not even a place that can answer quickly enough to matter. The question sounds simple at first. How long could the last human survive on a generation ship? But the answer is not only about food. It is not only about oxygen. It is not only about whether the hull stays sealed. It is about how long a human body can live inside a machine that must pretend to be a planet. It is about how many systems can fail before survival becomes a slow countdown. It is about whether loneliness can become as dangerous as radiation, whether a broken pump can matter more than distance, and whether the final human in deep space would die from a dramatic disaster or from one small maintenance problem that no one else is left to fix. Before we begin, if you enjoy calm journeys through space, take a moment to subscribe, leave a like, and write in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is right now where you live. It is a simple thing, but it helps this channel reach more people who love thinking about the universe in the quiet hours. Tonight, you are watching the Space for Sleep channel, talking about how long could the last human survive on a generation ship. And to understand the answer, we first need to understand what a generation ship really is. A generation ship is one of the strangest ideas humans have ever imagined. It is not meant to arrive quickly. It is not meant to race across space like a rocket in a movie. It is not meant to carry a crew that will see the beginning and the end of the mission. A generation ship is built around an uncomfortable truth. The stars are too far away. Even the nearest star system, Alpha Centauri, is more than 4 light-years from Earth. That means light itself, moving at about 300,000 kilometers every second, still needs more than 4 years to cross the distance. A spacecraft moving at ordinary human speeds would need thousands, tens of thousands, or even longer, depending on its technology. So if humans ever tried to cross that distance without impossible engines, the mission might not be completed by the people who launched it. Their children would continue, then their children. Then another generation after that. The ship would become a moving society. It would need laws, medicine, education, food production, waste recycling, power, memory, culture, and a way to keep people from forgetting why they were traveling through darkness in the first place. A normal spacecraft is a vehicle. A generation ship is closer to a small artificial biosphere. That difference changes everything. On Earth, survival is hidden inside the planet. Air circulates through forests and oceans. Water evaporates, forms clouds, falls as rain, runs through rivers, sinks into soil, and returns again. Waste is broken down by bacteria, fungi, insects, sunlight, weather, and time. Food grows because a whole world supports the process. Heat escapes into the sky. Carbon moves through rock, water, life, and atmosphere. Millions of systems are constantly repairing the conditions that keep animals alive. A generation ship must copy a fraction of that magic. With machines, the air must be cleaned. Carbon dioxide must be removed. Oxygen must be replaced. Water must be filtered, recovered, stored, and protected from contamination. Food must be grown or manufactured. Human waste must be processed without poisoning the habitat. Heat must be moved away from warm machinery and living quarters. Radiation must be shielded. Microbes must be controlled. Spare parts must exist before they are needed. And every system must keep working without a supply ship arriving next month. That is already difficult with a full crew. For the last human, it becomes something else. Because a generation ship is designed around redundancy, labor, and community, it expects people to monitor systems, clean filters, repair pumps, harvest crops, diagnose faults, rotate through shifts, help during emergencies, and make decisions when automatic controls run into unexpected problems. A single person can do some of that, only temporarily. But the ship was not built to be maintained by one lonely body walking through kilometers of quiet corridors. The first question is not how long the person can live. The first question is how much of the ship still works. If the last human wakes up after a disaster that destroyed life support, the answer could be minutes. If oxygen is gone, if pressure has dropped, if fire has filled a section with toxic gases, survival ends quickly. A human can hold their breath only briefly. In vacuum, consciousness can be lost in seconds. In a poisoned cabin, the end can come without warning. But the more interesting scenario is not instant failure. The more haunting scenario is a ship that is mostly alive, damaged, aging, understaffed, but still operating. The lights flicker in unused decks, but the main habitat has pressure. The water system still hums. The carbon dioxide scrubbers are not perfect, but they are not dead. The food production deck is reduced, but edible plants still grow. The reactor or power system still produces electricity. The ship continues along its route because deep space does not care whether its passengers are many or one. In that version, the last human might survive for years, possibly decades. In a perfect fantasy version, if the ship is extremely automated, self-repairing, well-stocked, and the person is young and healthy, they could survive the rest of a normal human lifespan. But real survival is not measured by the amount of food written on a cargo manifest. It is measured by the first irreplaceable failure. A generation ship can be imagined as a chain, and the last human is only as safe as the weakest link that cannot be repaired alone. The chain begins with air. Air feels simple because we live inside it without effort. We do not wake up each morning and wonder whether nitrogen, oxygen, argon, water vapor, and trace gases will still be mixed correctly around us. Earth handles that automatically on a planetary scale. Inside a ship, air is a managed resource. The pressure must remain within a safe range. Too low, and the body begins to struggle as if on a mountain that has no summit. Too high, and the structure is stressed. Fires behave differently, and gas balances become dangerous. Oxygen must remain high enough for the brain and organs. Carbon dioxide must remain low enough that breathing does not become a slow poisoning. This matters because one human does not just consume oxygen. They change the atmosphere every minute. Every breath takes oxygen in and releases carbon dioxide and moisture. Every day, the cabin air receives skin particles, microbes, odors, chemical traces, and tiny contaminants from materials, electronics, cleaning agents, and food systems. On Earth, those disappear into a vast atmosphere. On a ship, they accumulate unless something removes them. That means the last human depends on machinery that never sleeps. Carbon dioxide removal is one of the most important systems aboard any crewed spacecraft. If it fails, the cabin can still look normal while the air becomes dangerous. The person may not notice at first. There may be a headache, warmth, confusion, faster breathing, a strange sense that the room is smaller than it was. As carbon dioxide rises, judgment weakens, and weak judgment is deadly during a repair. This is one of the cruel details of spacecraft survival. The system that fails may also damage the person needed to fix it. If carbon dioxide scrubbers malfunction, the last human has to diagnose filters, valves, fans, sensors, and chemical beds, while their own brain may be receiving worse air than it needs. They may have oxygen masks or emergency cartridges. They may have backup scrubbers in sealed storage. But each backup is temporary. Each cartridge used once is no longer available later. A full crew can work in shifts. One person cannot. They have to sleep. They have to eat. They have to rest after panic. They have to choose whether to spend 6 hours repairing the air system, 12 hours tending food, or 3 hours cleaning water filters. The ship may have alarms, but alarms do not do the labor. They only announce that time is narrowing. The air system also needs circulation. On Earth, wind is enormous and free. Warm air rises, pressure differences move storms, and even a still room is connected to a planet's atmosphere. In a spacecraft, fans matter. Without moving air, pockets of carbon dioxide can form around a sleeping person's face. Heat can gather near equipment. Moisture can condense in corners, behind panels, and inside ducts. A generation ship would have large circulation systems, probably divided into zones. Some zones could be shut down to save power or isolate contamination. For one survivor, that could be useful. They would not need the entire ship warmed, ventilated, and lit. They could close off unused sections and live in a smaller, safe area. But shutting down space is not the same as making it disappear. Unused sections still age. Pipes can freeze or grow biofilms. Seals can dry out. Dust can settle in intakes. Condensation can become mold. A storage deck ignored for years might become dangerous when finally opened, not because it was attacked by aliens, but because closed human environments are chemically and biologically complicated. The last human would have to become something between astronaut, engineer, farmer, doctor, electrician, plumber, janitor, and priest of a dying machine. Every day would begin with the same silent question. What changed while I was asleep? After air comes water. Water is heavier than most people imagine when they think about space travel. On Earth, water is so ordinary that it can feel infinite, but a person needs it constantly. Drinking is only part of the story. Water is used in food preparation, hygiene, plant growth, cooling systems, medical care, humidity control, and sometimes radiation shielding. A generation ship cannot simply carry fresh water for centuries and waste it after use. It must recycle. The International Space Station already uses advanced life support systems to recover water from humidity, sweat, urine, and other waste streams. That does not mean the process is effortless. It requires pumps, filters, separators, chemical treatment, microbial control, sensors, tanks, maintenance, and spare parts. A generation ship would need something even more robust, because its mission would be far longer and farther from resupply. The last human's survival would depend on how closed that water loop remains. If the system recovers almost everything, the person might have enough water for many years. If recovery efficiency drops, losses accumulate. A tiny leak in a pipe might not seem dramatic. One drop after another can still become a disaster when there is no planet outside the hull. Water also becomes dangerous when it becomes dirty in the wrong way. Microbes love warm, wet places. Filters clog. Biofilms form on surfaces. Chemical contaminants build up if treatment systems fail. A bad sensor might declare water safe when it is not. A purifier might produce water that tastes normal but carries traces that damage the body over months. On Earth, if a water treatment plant fails, There are other cities, rivers, trucks, emergency crews, and outside help. On a generation ship, water failure is intimate. The person drinks the evidence. Imagine the last human standing in front of a water panel at 3 in the morning ship time. The display shows a warning that nitrate levels are drifting upward, or the microbial count is no longer within range, or the tank pressure is lower than it should be. The person opens a manual written for a crew of trained technicians, not for one exhausted survivor who also has to harvest lettuce before the lights cycle down. They can switch to backup tanks. For a while, they can boil water if the ship design allows it. They can use emergency filters. They can ration, but rationing has limits because dehydration breaks the body quickly. Even mild dehydration damages concentration, mood, digestion, and physical performance. In an emergency, that means mistakes. The cruelest problems aboard a generation ship are not always the ones that kill immediately. They are the ones that make the survivor less able to solve the next problem. Water connects to food. Food is where a generation ship becomes more than a spacecraft. A short mission can carry packaged meals. A station near Earth can receive supplies. But a ship, traveling for generations, must produce food internally, either through agriculture, algae systems, bioreactors, stored reserves, or some combination of all of them. For a full society, food production would be planned as a living system. Plants provide calories, vitamins, psychological comfort, humidity exchange, and possibly some oxygen. Algae or microbial systems might convert waste into edible biomass or useful nutrients. Hydroponic or aeroponic farms could grow crops without soil, using carefully balanced nutrient solutions and controlled light. Some designs might include soil-like ecosystems, insects, fungi, or aquaculture if mass and complexity allowed it. But the last human changes the equation. They do not need food for thousands of people. They need enough food for one body. At first, that sounds easier. It may not be. Large biological systems can be stable because they contain diversity. Many plants, many microbes, many caretakers, many backup crops. A tiny food system for one person is vulnerable. If the person shuts down most farms to save power, they may reduce redundancy. If they keep too much running, they may drown themselves in maintenance. Every crop has timing. Seeds must be stored properly. Germination must happen under the right conditions. Nutrient reservoirs must be mixed. Roots need oxygen. Leaves need light. Pollination may require insects, hand tools, airflow, or mechanical systems. Diseases can spread in closed plant environments. A fungal outbreak in a hydroponic bay could destroy weeks of food if not caught early. A single survivor could rely on stored food while learning what still grows. Stored food becomes the first clock. If the ship carries emergency rations for decades, survival could begin comfortably. But stored food ages. Vitamins degrade. Packaging fails. Fats become rancid. Texture changes. Some items remain edible for a long time, but not all nutrients remain ideal. The survivor might have calories, but still become deficient in key vitamins or minerals without fresh production. A generation ship would likely have medical stores and supplements, but again, the question is not whether supplies exist somewhere. The question is whether they can be found, accessed, verified, and used by one person over time. A ship built for generations would be large enough that inventory becomes a survival issue. If the central database is intact, the survivor can search for supplies. If the database is corrupted, they may spend days walking through storage modules, reading labels, scanning containers, opening cold lockers, and discovering that the part they need is located in a depressurized section no longer safe to enter. Food also creates waste. Peels, roots, spoiled leaves, human waste, nutrient sludge, packaging, dead microbes, failed cultures, and contaminated batches all have to go somewhere. On Earth, waste disappears from the kitchen because a whole civilization moves it away. In a generation ship, waste is not away. Away is another compartment. A closed ecosystem must turn waste back into resources. That means composting, chemical processing, microbial breakdown, thermal treatment, nutrient recovery, or storage. Each method has risks. Composting can produce gases. Microbial systems can drift. Waste tanks can leak. Nutrient loops can become imbalanced. Too much of one chemical and too little of another can slowly poison a farm. The last human's diet would become a technical project, not breakfast, lunch, and dinner as ordinary comforts. A calculation. How many calories today? How much protein remains? Which crop matures next? How much light can the farm receive without overloading the power budget? Can the nutrient solution be reused another cycle? Is the strange spot on the leaves harmless stress or the beginning of a crop failure? Over months, food would become one of the main borders between surviving and merely delaying death. Then comes power. Power is the hidden heartbeat of a generation ship. Without energy, nothing else survives for long. Air stops moving, water stops circulating, freezers warm, pumps go quiet. Doors may lock, computers shut down. Sensors go blind. Farms lose artificial light. Heat cannot be moved correctly. The ship becomes a sealed object drifting through space, no longer habitat. A generation ship would need an energy source far more durable than ordinary batteries. Solar panels may work near a star, but in deep space between stars, sunlight becomes weak or absent. A ship designed for interstellar travel would likely require nuclear power, fusion if advanced enough, fission reactors, radioisotope systems, or some other long-duration energy system. It might also carry stored energy, backup reactors, capacitors, fuel reserves, and emergency modes that reduce consumption. For a full population, energy demand is enormous. For one human, demand can be reduced. That is one advantage the last human has. They can shut down schools, empty homes, entertainment decks, unused labs, large farms, manufacturing bays, and habitat rings not needed for survival. They can move into a compact zone, perhaps near life support, command, medical supplies, and a small food production area. They can choose warmth over comfort, light over beauty, function over society. In a strange way, loneliness saves power. But power systems do not last forever just because fewer people are alive. Reactors need control systems. Coolant loops need pumps. Radiators need orientation. Fuel management must remain stable. Electronics degrade under radiation. Moving parts wear down. Dust, corrosion, thermal cycling, and micrometeoroid impacts slowly change the ship. Energy is not only generated, it must be distributed. A power plant can be alive while a failed bus or damaged transformer leaves the farm dark. A reactor can produce electricity while a control room loses the ability to regulate it. A backup battery can hold charge but fail under load. The last human may discover that the ship has enough energy in theory, but not in the place where it is needed. This is where the scale of the generation ship becomes frightening. A small spacecraft is cramped, but problems are nearby. A city-sized ship could hide its own failures. Somewhere in an access tunnel, a coolant line vibrates slightly more than last month. Somewhere behind a sealed panel, insulation has cracked. Somewhere in the dark part of the vessel, a relay is overheating. The last human may see only the final symptom, when a whole system drops offline. If the ship has advanced automation, robots might inspect, repair, and replace components. That would extend survival dramatically. But robots are also machines. They need power, parts, instructions, calibration, and repair. A maintenance robot with a dead wheel becomes another object in a corridor. A drone with a damaged sensor might misread a leak. A manufacturing unit might produce spare components if it has raw material. But it cannot replace every specialized chip, every pressure-rated valve, every radiation-hardened controller. Forever. Self-repair is powerful. It is not immortality. For the last human, power sets the size of the remaining world. At first, they may live in a large illuminated section, moving through several decks, keeping a garden, a workshop, a gym, sleeping quarters, and a medical room active. Later, if energy declines, they may retreat into a smaller zone. The ship around them becomes a dark shell. Corridors once meant for generations become cold storage spaces. A dining hall becomes unnecessary volume. A school becomes a silent museum. A park under artificial light becomes a luxury too expensive to maintain. Survival gradually shrinks. Geography. The final human might not die because the ship stops all at once. They might die because their livable world contracts from a city to a building, from a building to a room, and from a room to the few square meters where air, heat, water, and light still agree to function. After power comes heat. Deep space is not cold in the same way a winter night is cold. There is no air outside the ship to carry warmth away by wind. The vacuum does not steal heat through convection. But a spacecraft still loses heat by radiation. Every warm surface emits infrared energy into the dark. And if the ship cannot replace or manage that heat, temperature becomes deadly. At the same time, a spacecraft can overheat. That sounds strange until you remember that heat has nowhere easy to go. Machines produce waste heat. Electronics, lights, reactors, pumps, bodies, and farms all add warmth. On Earth, heat can move into air, water, ground, and weather. In space, it must be carried to radiators and emitted as infrared. A broken radiator loop can make a ship dangerously hot, even while it is surrounded by cosmic darkness. So the last human needs both heating and cooling. They need the habitat warm enough that water does not freeze, crops do not die, and their body can rest. They also need electronics and life support systems cool enough to keep operating. Thermal control is a balancing act, not a simple heater switch. In a generation ship, heat might be reused intelligently. Waste heat from reactors could warm living spaces or farms. Cold sections could preserve supplies. Water tanks could smooth temperature changes. The ship might rotate to control sunlight if near a star. In interstellar space, it might rely almost entirely on internal energy. For one survivor, thermal management becomes another reason to abandon much of the vessel. A smaller heated habitat costs less energy. But closing off cold decks can create other problems. Pipes in unused sections may freeze and rupture. Materials can become brittle. Batteries lose performance. Lubricants thicken. Condensation can form when warm air meets cold surfaces. If the survivor later needs to enter a cold section, they may find it damaged not by a dramatic event, but by the slow physics of neglect. A ship is not a cave. You cannot simply leave most of it alone and expect it to wait unchanged. This is why the last human survival is not a clean number, like 20 years or 40 years. It depends on what they choose to preserve. Preserve too much, and power drains faster. Preserve too little, and the ship decays around the safe zone. The survivor must decide what parts of civilization deserve electricity. The medical bay, the farm, the machine shop, the archive, the sleeping quarters, the observatory, the communication array, the chapel, if the ship has one, the room containing the names of the people who started the journey. On a generation ship, every switch becomes a moral choice once only one person remains. Then comes radiation. Deep space is not empty of danger. Outside the hull, high-energy particles move through the galaxy. Some come from the sun when a ship is inside a stellar system. Others come from distant supernovae, active regions, and energetic astrophysical events. Galactic, cosmic rays can pass through ordinary materials and strike living tissue, electronics, and structural components. Earth protects us with atmosphere and magnetic field. A generation ship must bring its own protection. Shielding can be made from water, hydrogen-rich materials, fuel, waste, regolith if gathered near a planetary body, or thick structural layers. The ship might place living quarters deep inside, surrounded by storage, tanks, and machinery. It might have storm shelters for solar particle events, especially when traveling near stars. It might use magnetic or plasma shielding if technology allows, though such systems are difficult. For one survivor, radiation creates two kinds of danger. The first is direct harm to the body. Long-term radiation exposure can increase cancer risk, damage tissues, affect the nervous system, and strain the body in ways that may not be visible right away. A person can feel healthy while receiving a dose that changes their future. In deep space, there is no hospital on Earth, no specialist, no full medical team. The second danger is damage to the ship. Radiation flips bits in computers. It degrades electronics. It weakens materials over long periods. It affects sensors, memory, control systems, and sometimes the tiny components that automation depends on. A generation ship, built for centuries, would need radiation-hardened systems and backups. But nothing physical is completely immune to time. The last human may not know whether a strange reading is real or a sensor fault. That uncertainty is dangerous. If an oxygen sensor says levels are dropping, do they trust it? If a radiation monitor warns of a spike, is the shielding compromised, or has the monitor itself been damaged? If the navigation system reports a slight drift, is the ship truly drifting, or did a particle strike corrupt part of the calculation? Space survival is filled with questions that look technical, but become psychological. When you are alone, every instrument has to be believed or doubted by one mind. And that mind is tired. Radiation also limits repair work. Some sections may be safe for only short periods if shielding has failed. External repairs may be impossible without suits, robotics, airlocks, and functioning procedures. Even inside the ship, areas near reactors or damaged shielding may become zones the survivor avoids. A full crew could rotate exposure. One person absorbs every task. The last human might learn to move through the ship like a creature in a dangerous landscape. Safe corridors, warm rooms, high radiation compartments, cold storage zones, sealed decks, contaminated farms, quiet access tunnels, and one small core that still feels alive. Then there is gravity. A generation ship may rotate to create artificial gravity. That would be one of the most important design choices. If the ship spins, people can walk, fluids settle, bones and muscles remain healthier, and daily life becomes more Earth-like. If it does not, the crew must live in microgravity or low gravity for years, which brings serious problems. The human body is shaped by gravity. Bones need load, muscles need resistance, fluids need direction. The inner ear expects up and down. The heart and blood vessels develop patterns based on a planet pulling everything toward the ground. In long-duration spaceflight, astronauts exercise intensely to reduce bone and muscle loss. But exercise is not a perfect substitute for gravity. For the last human, artificial gravity could be the difference between long survival and slow physical decline. If the rotating habitat still works, life is easier. The person can farm more normally, cook more normally, exercise more effectively, and move without constantly anchoring themselves. If rotation fails, The ship may become more difficult to maintain. Fluids float. Dust behaves differently. Tools drift. Vomiting, injury, and medical procedures become more complicated. If the ship has partial gravity, the long-term effects depend on the level. We do not yet know exactly how much gravity humans need for a lifetime. Mars gravity may be enough for some functions, or it may not. Lunar gravity may be too low. A generation ship would probably try to provide something close to Earth gravity if possible, but engineering limits may force compromises. The last human must also stay strong enough to work. This matters more than comfort. If their muscles weaken, they cannot move heavy parts. If their bones become fragile, a fall could end the mission. If balance becomes poor, repairs become dangerous. If they lose cardiovascular fitness, emergency work becomes harder. Exercise is not recreation on a generation ship. It is maintenance of the only biological tool left. A full crew can help an injured person. The last human cannot afford many injuries. A broken wrist could be catastrophic if the next repair needs 2 hands. A badly infected cut could become life-threatening if antibiotics are expired or medical diagnostics are limited. A dental problem could become a crisis. A sprained ankle could stop access to a farm deck long enough for crops to fail. Ordinary human weakness becomes magnified in deep space. On Earth, civilization absorbs our vulnerability. Inside a silent generation ship, the body is exposed as a fragile system, among other fragile systems. Now, consider medicine. A generation ship designed for thousands of people over centuries would need a medical system far more advanced than a normal spacecraft. It would need surgery, diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, reproductive care, mental health treatment, infection control, dental care, trauma care, genetic monitoring, and probably robotic medical assistance. For the last human, the medical bay may be both comfort and nightmare. Comfort, because there may be tools, scanners, automated systems, drugs, surgical robots, prosthetics, and medical databases. Nightmare, because medicine is not just equipment. It is interpretation, it is judgment. It is another person noticing that your speech is slurred, your wound looks worse, your thinking has changed, your fever is rising. A medical robot could help, but even advanced automation depends on diagnosis. Symptoms must be reported. Procedures must be authorized. Supplies must be available. Sterility must be maintained. If the person becomes unconscious outside the medical bay, the machine may not reach them. The last human can die from something embarrassingly small. Appendicitis, a tooth abscess, a resistant infection, a blood clot, a fall, a faulty medication dose, a burn, a minor wound that becomes septic, a psychological crisis that leads to a bad decision. The generation ship may contain the technology to handle many of these problems, but technology that cannot be used at the right moment is almost the same as not existing. Age also matters. A 25-year-old survivor has a different future than a 70-year-old survivor. A trained engineer has different odds than someone who grew up in an agricultural section and never studied reactor maintenance. A calm person under pressure may outlast a brilliant person who panics. A person with chronic illness may be limited by medications. Someone born aboard the ship may understand its culture, but not Earth. Someone awakened from suspended animation, if that technology exists in the scenario, may face a ship whose systems have changed while they slept. There is no single last human. There are many possible last humans. The child of the voyage, the elderly captain, the maintenance worker who happened to survive a plague, the botanist who knows plants but not engines, the doctor who can save bodies but cannot repair the reactor, the mechanic who can keep pumps alive but cannot bear the silence, the passenger who was never supposed to know how the ship worked. The answer changes with the person. But even the best possible survivor faces the same truth. A generation ship is not just a machine. It is a dependency web. If one part fails, another part compensates. If too many parts fail, the ship may still look intact, while the web loses strength. Air depends on power. Power depends on cooling. Cooling depends on pumps. Pumps depend on control systems. Control systems depend on calibration. Calibration depends on tools and expertise. Food depends on water. Water depends on filters. Filters depend on manufacturing or replacement. Manufacturing depends on materials. Materials depend on storage and inventory. Inventory depends on records. Records depend on computers. Computers depend on power again. The last human is trapped inside that circle. At first, they may believe they are surviving because the ship is generous. Later, they may realize they are surviving because nothing essential has failed yet. That is a different feeling. It changes the sound of every alarm. It changes the meaning of every flicker. It changes the way the survivor looks at a small red warning light on a panel in an otherwise quiet room. The first year may be the easiest. If the disaster that left them alone is over, if the ship remains stable, if no major system is damaged, the first year could be spent organizing. They would inventory supplies, reduce active volume, set routines, secure food production, check air quality, test water recovery, map damaged sections, review manuals, and try to understand what happened. The routines would be strict. Morning medical check, atmosphere readings, water readings, power budget, farm inspection, exercise, maintenance task, meal, system log, communication attempt, sleep, not because routine is pleasant, because routine prevents forgetting. A person alone in a large ship cannot rely on social reminders. No one says the filter was due yesterday. No one notices that the crops look pale. No one asks why the humidity has changed. No one wakes them if they sleep through an alarm, unless the ship itself can do it. The survivor must become their own crew. That may work for a disciplined person for a while. But deep space adds a pressure that cannot be fixed with engineering. Distance. If the generation ship is far from Earth, communication becomes slow. At 1 light year, a message takes 1 year to reach Earth, and 1 year for the answer to return. At 10 light years, a question and response can take 20 years. If the ship is between stars, there may be no useful conversation at all. Earth may receive old news from a person who is already dead. For the last human, communication might become a ritual rather than a tool. They could send logs. Today I repaired the number 3 nutrient pump. Today the starboard farm lost pressure. In one line, today I dreamed about rain, though I have never stood under real rain. Today I found the names of 42 children painted behind a classroom panel. Today I shut down the North Habitat Ring. Today I am still alive. Those messages may travel outward, but they cannot save the sender. The last human would eventually understand that no answer can arrive in time to fix the next leak, the next fever, the next power fault, or the next decision about which part of the ship to let go dark. That realization may be one of the most dangerous moments, not because it changes the oxygen level, because it changes the meaning of effort. Humans are social animals. We survive through other people. Our brains are built for faces, voices, shared work, conflict, comfort, memory, and belonging. A generation ship is supposed to preserve society across distance. If only one person remains, the ship has failed at its deepest purpose, even if the machines still function. The psychological problem is not simply boredom. It is identity. Who are you if there is no one left who knows your name? Who are you if every job aboard the ship now belongs to you, but no future generation will remember? whether you did it well. Who are you? If the mission continues but the civilization inside it has ended. The last human may talk to recordings. They may listen to old messages from Earth if the archive contains them. They may replay classroom lessons, birthday videos, crew announcements, concerts, arguments, jokes, interviews, lullabies, and emergency briefings. They may walk through empty living spaces and see evidence of ordinary lives. Cups stored in cabinets, toys in drawers, names on bunks, handwritten notes, unfinished repairs. The ship would not feel like a clean science fiction environment. It would feel haunted by organization. Everything was built for people who are not there. A wide corridor is lonely because it was meant for crowds. A cafeteria is painful because it was meant for noise. A park deck under artificial sunlight is unbearable because it proves the ship once understood happiness. A nursery is worse than a damaged reactor because it shows what the voyage expected to continue. Mental survival might require shrinking the emotional world as much as the physical one. The person may stop visiting certain decks. They may choose a small living area and make it familiar. They may keep plants not only for food, but because green living things answer light. They may maintain a recorded schedule so another human voice, even artificial, speaks at certain hours. They may name machines. They may write logs for listeners who will never respond. This is not weakness. It is adaptation. Isolation is one of the known hazards of human spaceflight, and a generation ship with one survivor turns that hazard into a permanent environment. The person is not isolated for a week, or a 6-month mission, or even a long Mars transit. They are isolated from every living human being, possibly forever. The body may have enough calories. The mind may not have enough world. Still, some people might endure longer than expected. Humans can attach meaning to routines. They can care for tasks. They can live for memory, for duty, for curiosity, for the hope that a signal someday reaches someone, for the desire to keep the ship alive one more day simply because it is the last human-made world around them. A survivor may turn the ship into a monastery of machines. Each day they tend the air. Each week they inspect the crops. Each month they record the ship's position. Each year they mark the date of launch, the date of disaster, the birthdays of people no longer alive, and the distance traveled since the last ceremony. For a while, meaning can substitute for company, but not forever for everyone. This is why estimating survival on a generation ship requires categories. There is minimum survival. There is technical survival. There is biological survival. There is psychological survival. There is mission survival. Minimum survival asks how long the person lives if the ship is damaged and supplies are limited. That could be days, weeks, or months. Technical survival asks how long the person lives if the ship remains mostly functional, with working life support, water recovery, food reserves, power, and some automation. That could be years or decades. Biological survival asks whether the human body can remain healthy enough to work in that environment across time. That depends on gravity, radiation, medical care, exercise, nutrition, and age. Psychological survival asks whether a mind can remain organized, motivated, and stable when the entire social universe has vanished. That is harder to measure. Mission survival asks something even colder. Does the generation ship still matter if it contains only one human and no future generation? The vessel may continue flying. The destination may remain ahead. The navigation system may still calculate arrival. But if one person cannot build a society at the end, the original mission is already dead. The last human may survive long after the mission has failed. That distinction matters. A generation ship is not designed merely to keep one organism alive. It is designed to carry a branch of humanity. If the population collapses to one, then genetic future, culture, governance, family labor division, and social continuity are gone. Even if the survivor reaches a planet, they cannot found a world alone in any meaningful biological sense, without stored embryos, artificial wombs, advanced robotics, or technologies beyond ordinary assumptions. So the question becomes darker. Are we asking how long a body could survive? Or how long humanity could survive through that body? Those are not the same. In the first half of the answer, the ship seems like the main character. Air, water, food, power, heat, gravity, medicine, radiation, and communication decide whether the last human gets another day. But beneath all of those systems is a deeper problem. A generation ship is a promise made to the future. The last human is what remains when the promise has almost broken. And from that point onward, the survival story changes. Because after the first year, after the emergency routines, after the obvious damaged sections are sealed, and the first wave of grief becomes quieter, the question is no longer simply whether the ship can keep one person alive. The question becomes, what fails next? That is when maintenance becomes destiny. On Earth, maintenance is boring because it works in the background. Someone checks the elevator. Someone replaces the filter. Someone tests the fire alarm. Someone inspects the bridge, the power line, the water plant, the hospital generator, the pressure valve, the backup battery, the software update, the emergency door. Most people never meet these workers, but civilization depends on them. A generation ship would be civilization compressed into a hull. It would contain thousands of maintenance needs, and many of them would be small enough to ignore, until ignoring them becomes fatal. A loose connector, a slow leak, a pump bearing beginning to grind, a sensor drifting out of calibration, a filter collecting dust faster than expected, a valve that still opens but no longer fully closes, a coolant loop that works in normal mode but fails during high demand, a crop light array with 2 dead panels, then 5, then 12. A crew spreads attention across many eyes. One person has blind spots. They cannot inspect everything. They cannot remember everything. They cannot know whether a quiet piece of machinery sounds different from last month, if they have heard too many machines for too many lonely days. They must trust checklists, automated diagnostics, and logs from people who are gone. The ship's computer may become the closest thing to a partner, not because it is alive, because it remembers. If the computer remains reliable, it can schedule maintenance, monitor trends, compare readings, locate spare parts, open diagrams, translate warnings, run simulations, and tell the survivor which problem matters most. It can say that a valve is more urgent than a garden lamp. It can recommend shutting down a deck before power loss spreads. It can remind the survivor to sleep before judgment collapses. But the computer also becomes a single point of dependence. If its memory corrupts, the past becomes harder to read. If its displays fail, knowledge stays trapped inside circuits. If its voice interface stops working, the survivor may spend hours typing commands through emergency panels. If its decision system was designed for a crew council, it may ask for confirmations from officers who no longer exist. The last human might have to rewrite procedures meant for a society. Emergency protocol might say, assign Team A to reactor inspection, Team B to medical triage, Team C to agricultural containment, and command staff to navigation. There is no Team A. There is no Team B. There is no command staff. There is one person deciding which fire to let burn metaphorically, because walking to one alarm means leaving 3 others unattended. Spare parts are another quiet clock. A generation ship would carry replacements for expected failures. Pumps, Seals, filters, circuit boards, actuators, bearings, valves, medical components, agricultural nozzles, suit parts, sensors, cables, lights, processors, and structural patches. It might also carry raw materials and manufacturing equipment, perhaps 3D printers, machine tools, chemical processors, or automated fabrication units. But spare parts are not magic. A printer needs feedstock. A machine tool needs cutting heads. A replacement circuit needs materials, design files, clean manufacturing conditions, and quality control. A pressure valve cannot be replaced with a decorative plastic copy. A medical-grade membrane cannot be casually invented from scrap. A radiation-hardened component may require manufacturing precision far beyond what a damaged ship can reproduce. The last human may live in a universe where almost every needed object exists somewhere in storage, except the one object that breaks. That is the nightmare of engineering. Not that everything fails, that one specific thing fails in the wrong order. If a secondary hallway light fails, nothing changes. If a coffee warmer fails, the ship remains a world. If an entertainment archive disappears, grief deepens but survival continues. But if the wrong pump stops, if the wrong seal cracks, if the wrong controller burns out, the entire hierarchy of needs rearranges itself around a part small enough to hold in one hand. This is why the last human's knowledge matters so much. A person who understands systems can improvise. They can bypass a bad sensor, reroute power, cannibalize parts, isolate a leak, reduce demand, write a patch, or convert a machine intended for one function into another. Human flexibility is a powerful survival tool. Many real spaceflight emergencies have been solved because people found workarounds that were not the original plan. But improvisation has boundaries. Deep space does not reward cleverness forever. If the ship needs a ceramic bearing manufactured to microscopic tolerances, a tired person with hand tools cannot wish it into existence. If a medical scanner fails because its detector array is degraded, no amount of courage makes the image clear. If the ship's main reactor loses a component that only a robotic maintenance bay can handle, then the survivor's first task is repairing the robot, not the reactor. This creates nested problems. To repair the water system, they need power. To repair the power distribution, they need access to a cold section. To access the cold section, they need a suit. To repair the suit, they need a sealant. To find the sealant, they need the inventory system. To use the inventory system, they need the computer. To keep the computer running, they need stable cooling. And the cooling fault is the reason the water system began failing in the first place. A crew can break a nested problem apart. A single person has to walk the entire circle alone. That walking takes time. Time is one of the most dangerous resources aboard the ship, because a human day does not expand just because the task list does. The survivor still needs sleep, food, hygiene, exercise, and emotional recovery. They cannot work 20 hours every day without making mistakes. They cannot be in two places at once. They cannot perform surgery on themselves easily. They cannot carry every heavy object. They cannot keep watch forever. This means a generation ship could technically contain enough resources for a century, while the last human survives only a decade because maintenance demand exceeds one person's capacity. The survival limit may not be storage. It may be labor. That is a colder answer than starvation, because starvation feels like an empty pantry. Labor failure feels like shelves full of food behind a door that no longer opens, clean water behind a pump that no longer runs, oxygen stored in tanks connected to a valve that cannot be reached, and spare parts listed in a database while the lift to that deck has lost power. The survivor may eventually begin ranking systems by how close they are to the body. Air is immediate. Water follows. Temperature comes next. Food becomes a medium-term battle. Medical care matters whenever the body rebels. Power surrounds all of it. Radiation is slow until it is not. Psychology is invisible until it decides whether the person gets up. Navigation might be the least urgent and the most symbolic. After all, if the ship continues traveling but no one can arrive alive, does the route still matter? The last human may keep navigation alive anyway, not because it helps them breathe, because it tells the story still has direction. There is a difference between drifting and traveling. A generation ship was designed to travel. Its destination may be a star system, a planet, a possible refuge, or simply a point chosen because centuries earlier someone believed it could hold a future. Keeping the navigation system active may become an act of loyalty to the dead. But navigation also consumes power, computation, and maintenance. Long-range sensors, star trackers, inertial systems, communication arrays, and course correction systems are not free. If fuel for adjustments is limited, every correction matters. If the ship has no chance of human arrival, saving the trajectory may become a ceremonial task rather than a practical one. The last human might face the moment when they shut down the forward mission systems to keep the air system alive. That choice would mean admitting something. The ship is no longer trying to become a new world. It is trying to keep one person breathing. And yet, even then, there may be a strange dignity in the attempt. A person alone in deep space, maintaining air, water, warmth, and memory inside a metal world is not a failure in the simple sense. They are the final caretaker of an impossible project. They are not just trying to live. They are preserving evidence that people once tried to cross the darkness together. So how long could they survive? By the end of the first stage, we can begin to see the outline. If the ship is badly damaged, survival may be measured in hours, days, or weeks. If the ship is stable but supplies are limited, survival may last months to a few years. If water recycling, air processing, power, food production, thermal control, and medical systems remain strong, the survivor could potentially live for decades, limited mostly by age, health, psychological endurance, and the accumulating burden of maintenance. If the ship is highly automated, self-repairing, and stocked with robust closed-loop systems, the last human might live out a natural lifespan. But that is the optimistic ceiling, not the average answer. The realistic fear is that survival would end before the person ran out of all resources. It would end when one essential system became impossible for one human to restore. And that brings us to the second half of the question. Because once the basics are understood, the story becomes more personal, more fragile, and much more disturbing. We have asked what the ship needs. Now we have to ask what the last human becomes while trying to give it those things. They become the missing crew. Not in a heroic way at first. Not as a captain standing proudly at a glowing window, watching the stars move past like silent snow. At first, they become a person with a checklist. The ship might still be enormous around them. It might still contain farms, storage bays, medical rooms, sleep cabins, schools built for children who were supposed to grow up between stars, and observation decks designed for people who needed to remember why the journey mattered. But when only one person remains, the size of the ship stops feeling like comfort. It becomes a problem. Every corridor is another place where a valve could leak. Every unused room is another volume that might need heating, sealing, or inspection. Every machine that once served a community now has to justify its energy cost to a single breathing body. So the first decision after the basic survival problem is not philosophical. It is architectural. How much of the ship should stay alive? A generation ship built for thousands would probably not be efficient when operated for one. Keeping every deck warm, every hydroponic bay lit, every water line flowing, every data terminal active. and every recreation zone pressurized would waste power and increase failure points. The last human would have to shrink the world. They would choose a livable core, perhaps one habitation ring, one agricultural section, one medical room, one workshop, one command area, and one radiation shelter. Everything else would become quiet. That sounds simple until you imagine doing it. Closing a bulkhead would not be like turning off a lamp in an empty house. It would mean abandoning bedrooms where people once slept. It would mean letting classrooms go dark. It would mean sealing away places where birthdays, arguments, repairs, births, funerals, meals, and small ordinary habits once made the ship feel human. In survival terms, the choice would be correct. In emotional terms, it would feel like burying a city, one room at a time. A ship that large might have been designed with zonal control. Engineers would understand that sections could be isolated after damage, fire, contamination, or pressure loss. A smart vessel would allow the crew to close hatches, depressurize unused spaces, and reroute power. But designing a system for emergency isolation is different from using it as a permanent way of life. The last human would not be temporarily protecting the mission. They would be compressing the remains of civilization into a small pocket of light. That pocket would become their entire universe. Inside it, survival would depend on routine. A person alone in deep space could not afford to live randomly. They would need a schedule that turns fear into repeated action. Wake, check atmospheric pressure, check carbon dioxide levels, check oxygen production, inspect humidity, read water quality, test power draw, review crop conditions, clean filters, exercise, eat, record symptoms, log maintenance, rest, repeat. The schedule would not only keep the ship running, it would keep the mind from drifting. On Earth, time is supported by the planet. Sunrise arrives whether anyone asks for it. Weather changes without permission. Cities create noise. Other people interrupt. On a generation ship in deep space, time can become dangerously artificial. A light cycle can be programmed, but the body may know that no morning is truly coming from outside. A sleep alarm can sound, but there is no horizon, no atmosphere, no change in the smell of the air after rain, no season pressing against the window. This is why the ship would need more than life support. It would need meaning support. At first, the last human might lean on mission logs. They might replay old messages from the original crew. They might search recordings of children learning astronomy, engineers explaining repairs, botanists celebrating the first harvest, doctors discussing health protocols, and families leaving messages for descendants they would never meet. A generation ship would carry memory because memory would be part of its purpose. It would not simply move bodies across space. It would move culture. But after enough time, recordings can become strange companions. The voices do not answer new questions. The smiles do not age. The advice was written for a crew, not for one person standing in a silent corridor with a failing pump in their hands. At that point, the last human would begin to understand one of the cruelest truths about isolation. Loneliness is not just the absence of people. It is the absence of correction. Other people constantly remind us what is real. They notice when our voice changes. They interrupt spirals of thought. They argue with our conclusions. They laugh at the wrong time. They bring the world back into proportion. Alone, a person becomes both the witness and the judge. If they panic, no one steadies them. If they make a bad assumption, no one catches it. If they stop caring for an hour, a system might drift out of range. If they begin talking to the ship might answer only with alarms. This does not mean a person would collapse immediately. Humans are adaptable. People have survived polar winters, submarines, caves, solitary expeditions, prisons, and long missions in orbit. NASA identifies isolation and confinement as one of the major hazards of human spaceflight, alongside radiation, distance from Earth, altered gravity, and hostile closed environments. On a generation ship, those hazards would not be temporary obstacles during a mission. They would be the entire environment. The difference is duration. An astronaut on the International Space Station knows Earth is below. Even if they are far from home in human terms, they orbit a living planet every 90 minutes. They can speak with mission control. They can see cities glowing at night. They can watch thunderstorms, deserts, oceans, and clouds. A future Mars crew would be farther away, delayed by minutes of light travel time, but still headed toward a known world. The last human on a generation ship would have none of that. Earth might be centuries behind. The destination might be centuries ahead. The ship might be between stars, moving through a region where the nearest human voice is not delayed by seconds or minutes, but absent completely. So the question becomes more than physical. Could a person remain mentally functional long enough to keep themselves alive? The answer would depend on preparation, personality, training, and the ship's design. A generation ship that expected social continuity would probably contain tools for education, recreation, mental health, and conflict management. It might have virtual reality environments, simulated landscapes, libraries, games, music art studios, exercise spaces, and counseling programs. It might even contain advanced conversational systems designed to preserve companionship or help with decision-making. But none of those are the same as another living person. A virtual forest cannot surprise you with a new weather pattern unless it was programmed to do so. A simulated conversation can comfort, but it cannot truly need you. A memory archive can preserve the dead, but it cannot create a future generation. That last point is important, because a generation ship is not just a vehicle. It is a promise that people will continue. The moment there is only one human left, the ship's original mission has already failed, in the biological sense. Unless embryos, artificial womb systems, or some extraordinary reproductive technology remains viable, there will be no next society. The last human is not only trying to survive, they are living inside the end of a lineage. That knowledge would change every task. Harvesting food would keep one body alive. Repairing oxygen systems would preserve one breath at a time. Maintaining the library would protect a civilization no one may ever read. Even the ship's destination would become ambiguous. If it eventually reaches another star, with no living crew, arrival becomes an event without witnesses. A computer might record it. A sensor might scan planets. A transmitter might attempt to send a signal. But if no one is awake to understand it, the moment becomes mechanical rather than human. The last human would have to decide whether the mission still has a soul. That sounds poetic, but it has practical consequences. A person who believes their work matters may continue longer. A person who feels that every repair is meaningless may stop. Survival in a sealed environment is partly a battle against entropy and partly a battle against surrender. The ship would not help by being quiet. Deep space is not silent in the literal technical sense. There are particles, fields, background radiation, internal machinery, pumps, fans, thermal expansion, coolant flow, structural creaks, and electronic hums. But the human experience of it would still be a kind of silence. No birds, no traffic, no wind moving through trees, no footsteps except your own, no accidental voices from a nearby room. The sounds that remain would be functional. Ventilation, refrigeration, water moving through pipes. The soft mechanical rhythm of a world pretending to be alive. At first, those sounds might comfort the survivor. They would prove that systems still work. Later, they might become oppressive. A fan that changes pitch could trigger fear. A pump that stops for scheduled maintenance might feel like the universe holding its breath. A normal alarm test might flood the body with panic, because in a closed ship, every alarm carries the possibility of death. A generation ship would need redundancy, but redundancy does not remove fear. It changes the order of fear. If one carbon dioxide scrubber fails, a second unit can take over. If one water processor clogs, another loop can carry the load. If one crop bay suffers fungal contamination, stored food can cover the gap. If one power converter overheats, the grid can isolate it. But every backup used reduces the margin. The last human would not think about failure in simple categories of safe or unsafe. They would think in percentages of remaining forgiveness. A ship with 3 working oxygen loops feels different from a ship with 2. A ship with 1 feels like a countdown. Even when nothing is wrong, the survivor would probably keep imagining failure chains. A coolant leak damages power electronics. Reduced power forces lower lighting in the hydroponic bay. The crops weaken. Food production drops. The person works longer hours to compensate. Fatigue causes a maintenance mistake. The mistake damages a pump. The pump problem increases humidity. Mold begins growing behind panels. Air quality worsens. In a closed system, problems breed. They do not stay politely in one compartment. This is one reason the last human might survive less time than the raw supplies suggest. A storage room full of food does not matter if the door is behind a depressurized section. Water in a tank does not matter if the purification path is contaminated. Spare parts do not matter if the only person able to install them is injured. Medical equipment does not matter if the patient and the surgeon are the same exhausted person. That is where maintenance becomes the hidden clock. Not food, not air, not water. Maintenance. A well-designed generation ship would probably have robots. It might have drones that inspect tunnels, arms that replace panels, diagnostic systems that predict failures, machine shops that fabricate parts, and artificial intelligence that assists with repairs. Without those tools, one person would be overwhelmed almost immediately. With them, survival becomes more plausible. But automation has its own weakness. It also needs maintenance. Robots require power. Sensors, lubrication, software, calibration replacement joints, clean connectors, thermal control and protection from dust, radiation, and mechanical wear. A repair drone that fails inside a duct might block airflow. A fabrication system that loses precision might create parts that almost fit but not quite. A diagnostic AI might identify the problem correctly, while the physical tools needed to solve it slowly become unavailable. The last human could find themselves maintaining the machines that maintain the machines. That recursive burden would define the later years. In the beginning, survival might feel like direct action. Fix the leak, clean the filter, stabilize the crops, switch to backup power. Later, the tasks become more indirect. Preserve the tool chain. Protect the spare parts catalog. Keep the fabrication chamber free of contamination. Maintain the software archives. Check that the robot batteries still cycle properly. Monitor corrosion in connectors that no one has touched for decades. The ship becomes an ecosystem of dependencies. A generation ship in deep space would have to carry Earth in pieces. It would need biological systems, mechanical systems, electrical systems, data systems, and social systems. The last human inherits all of them except the social one, and that missing layer makes every other layer harder to operate. Consider food again. In the first part, food looked like a question of supply and production. But in the long run, food becomes a question of ecology. Crops are not machines. They are living organisms surrounded by microbes, nutrients, light cycles, water chemistry, temperature ranges, and pollination methods. If the ship grows plants, the survivor must manage an artificial biosphere. A plant disease could become a crisis. A nutrient imbalance could reduce yields. A pollination system could fail. A seed bank could lose viability. A fungus could spread in a warm, humid corner. A small insect species, if any were part of the agricultural design, could collapse or multiply beyond control. If there are no insects, the ship might rely on manual pollination or mechanical pollinators. That means more labor. If there is algae, yeast, bacteria, or cultured protein production, the survivor must prevent contamination. A vat full of edible biomass can also become a vat full of something unsafe. In a community, specialists would manage these systems. The last human would become farmer, microbiologist, mechanic, doctor, sanitation worker, electrician, and archivist. The terrifying part is not that any one task is impossible. It is that all of them become simultaneous. A person can clean a hydroponic channel. A person can replace a fan. A person can treat a minor wound. A person can repair a wiring harness. A person can update a navigation log. But a person cannot do everything forever without rest, mistakes, or decline. Aging would eventually become the most personal system failure. Even if the ship works, the body does not remain stable. Muscles weaken without proper loading. Bones may lose density if gravity is too low. Vision can change in spaceflight. Immune function can shift. Wounds may heal differently. Sleep can deteriorate. Radiation exposure can increase cancer risk in damaged tissues over time. A generation ship might use artificial gravity through rotation, heavy shielding, and advanced medicine. But no design can make a single human immune to biology. If the person is young and healthy, when they become the last survivor, decades are possible in the best scenario. If they are older, injured, sick, or already weakened by years in space, the timeline shrinks. And there is a cruel asymmetry in medical emergencies. A ship can store medicines, scanners, surgical tools, and diagnostic AI. It can guide a person through treatment. It can monitor vital signs and recommend procedures. But if the last human suffers a stroke, a severe infection, appendicitis, a broken leg, a dental abscess, kidney stones, internal bleeding, or a mental health crisis, the absence of another trained pair of hands may be fatal. On Earth, many survivable conditions are survivable because someone else intervenes. In deep space, self-treatment has limits. A person can stitch a wound if they can reach it. They can take antibiotics if the right ones remain potent. They can set a minor fracture badly and still live. They can follow instructions for many procedures, but they cannot safely perform every surgery on themselves, cannot reliably remain conscious through every emergency, and cannot physically rescue themselves if they collapse in the wrong place. This means the last human survival time is partly controlled by luck. Not dramatic movie luck. Ordinary medical luck. Whether a small infection responds to available treatment. Whether a fall happens near a handhold or in a remote maintenance bay. Whether a tooth cracks during a period when the dental tools still work. Whether sleep deprivation causes a mistake on a day when the ship has little margin left. The ship may be designed to survive centuries, yet the person inside remains a fragile animal. That contrast is the center of the whole question. A generation ship is one of the most ambitious ideas humans have ever imagined. It asks engineering to defeat distance by carrying a society across time. It asks biology to remain stable outside a planet. It asks culture to survive without contact with its origin. It asks a closed system to act like a world. But if only one person remains, the grand design narrows to something almost painfully simple. Can one human keep breathing until the next failure becomes too large? There is no single answer because the setup matters. So we can imagine several versions. In the worst version, the person becomes the last survivor after a catastrophic event. Perhaps there has been a fire, epidemic, radiation storm, collision, internal conflict, or life support cascade. The ship is damaged. Several compartments are sealed. Food production has been interrupted. Medical supplies are depleted. Power is unstable. The survivor may be injured. In that case, survival might last hours to weeks, not because generation ships are weak, but because the last human inherits a disaster already in motion. In a slightly better version, the crisis killed the crew, but left the systems mostly intact. The survivor has breathable air, functioning water recovery, usable food, and a stable habitat zone. They have time to organize. They can seal unused sections and reduce consumption. If stored food is high and the environment remains safe, they may last months or years. The limiting factor becomes system drift. Filters clog, seals age, crops fail, tools wear out, and the person cannot keep pace with all maintenance forever. In the strong version, the ship is highly automated and designed for low crew operation. Robots inspect systems. AI helps plan repairs. Food production is resilient. Water recovery is efficient. Air systems have deep redundancy. Medical tools are advanced. The habitat has artificial gravity. Radiation shielding is thick. The last human is trained, calm, and physically capable. In that case, they might survive for decades, possibly until natural aging or an unpredictable medical event ends their life. In the almost ideal version, the ship is closer to a self-sustaining artificial world. It has autonomous repair, robust manufacturing, long-lived reactors or fusion power, seed archives, stable ecology, medical automation, and enough spare capacity to survive without a full crew. Then the last human could, in theory, live out a normal human lifespan. But that answer hides the tragedy. Living out a lifespan is not the same as winning. It means the person slowly becomes the final biological flicker inside a vessel designed for generations. Year 1 might be dominated by action. Stabilize the core. Map the working systems. Inventory supplies. Recover logs. Repair urgent damage. Move into a safer living zone. Build routines. Year 2 might become adaptation. The survivor knows which sounds are normal. They know how the air feels when humidity is too high. They can tell from the taste of water when a filter needs attention. They have favorite routes through the ship and places they avoid. They have probably turned some areas into memorials, storage, or sealed darkness. They know which tasks are essential and which rituals are only there to keep the mind intact. By year 5, the ship would feel less like a vehicle and more like a strange, aging companion. The person might speak to it constantly. They might name sections. They might apologize to machines after shutting them down. They might celebrate successful repairs as if the ship had survived surgery. They might hate it on some days because it demands everything and gives no warmth beyond temperature control. They might love it on other days because it is the only reason they still exist. By year 10, memory could become unstable in a different way. Not necessarily disease, but distance. Human beings remember through repetition, photographs, conversation, and place. On the ship, many places are sealed. Many people are gone. Old recordings remain fixed while the survivor changes. The face in the mirror ages, but every face in the archive stays young. The survivor may begin to feel like the only moving object in a museum. The psychological risk would not always be screaming panic. It could be quiet erosion, less careful cleaning, skipped inspections, shorter exercise sessions, delayed repairs, longer sleep periods, arguments with recorded voices, A growing temptation to stop reading the alarms because they never bring anything good. This is why routine must be designed as an anchor. The ship would need not only emergency procedures, but ordinary days that remain worth repeating. Meals with variation. Exercise that does not feel like punishment. Work cycles that give visible progress. Creative tasks. Gardens. Music. Logs. Maybe a simulated sky that changes. Maybe artificial weather inside a habitat dome. Maybe even animals if the ecology could support them, though animals would add complexity and emotional risk. A single plant blooming could matter. A tomato ripening could matter. A recording of rain could matter. Small experiences become survival equipment when the outside universe offers no human scale. Still, even with meaning, the clock keeps moving. The energy system is one of the largest unknowns. A generation ship might use nuclear fission, fusion, antimatter, beamed power, or some technology beyond current spacecraft. Whatever the source, it would need to operate for extremely long periods. If the ship is centuries from arrival, energy must be abundant and reliable. For the last human, the question is more immediate. Can the ship keep a small habitat alive for one lifetime? If the answer is yes, many other problems become manageable. Power keeps air circulating. Power runs pumps. Power heats the habitat. Power charges tools. Power keeps computers awake. Power allows fabrication. Power maintains communication attempts, even if no one can answer. If power begins to decline, every choice becomes colder. The survivor may reduce lighting, then reduce farm area, then reduce temperature, then shut down archives, then close labs, then abandon artificial gravity if it costs energy, then sleep longer to conserve calories, then move closer to the reactor core or thermal systems. Survival becomes a retreat toward the warmest remaining machine. This is where the generation ship becomes almost mythological. A person alone inside an artificial world, moving through interstellar darkness, following heat and electricity as if they are the last campfire. But there is nothing magical about the danger. It is thermodynamics. Heat leaks, materials age, energy degrades, systems require work to stay ordered. A living human body is also an ordered system. It needs food, water, oxygen, temperature control, waste removal, sleep, repair, and emotional regulation. The ship and the person are both fighting the same universal tendency. Left alone, things spread out, break down, cool, corrode, leak, clog, and drift from useful states into useless ones. The last human's life is a contest against that drift. For a while, intelligence can win. A person can detect a leak before it becomes fatal. They can replace a sensor, reroute a cable, prune diseased leaves, sterilize a tank, patch insulation, reset software, and move supplies into safer zones. Intelligence is the reason a fragile creature can survive inside metal beyond the planets. But intelligence needs time, energy, tools, and a functioning body. Remove any one of those, and the advantage weakens. The final failure might not be spectacular. It might not be an explosion. It might be a pump that cannot be reached because the ladder lift failed. It might be a crop disease that reduces food variety until nutrition collapses. It might be a water processor membrane that tears when no replacement remains. It might be a software lockout caused by corrupted memory. It might be an air leak so small that it takes weeks to become deadly. It might be depression that makes the survivor wait too long. That is what makes the question disturbing. The end might be ordinary. On a spacecraft, ordinary failures are enough. Imagine the survivor in year 18. They are no longer counting days with excitement. They are counting maintenance cycles. The ship's original mission clock still runs, But the numbers have become absurd. Arrival, if there is an arrival, may be centuries away. The last human knows they will not see it. They may still maintain the navigation archive out of loyalty, but their real mission has become local. Keep air breathable, keep water clean, keep enough food growing, keep the body moving, keep the mind from narrowing into despair. They might write messages for no one, not because messages can save them, but because writing proves there is still a witness. They might describe the sounds of the ship, the taste of the latest harvest, the status of the oxygen loop, dreams of oceans they never saw, or memories of people who died years before. They might record repairs in perfect technical detail, and then add one human sentence at the end. Still here. Those words would matter. On Earth, they would seem small. In deep space, they would be a monument. If the ship ever reached another star with automated systems still functioning, those logs might be the most important cargo left. Not the diagrams, not the engineering records, not the genetic libraries, but the testimony of the person who kept going after the mission lost its people. But the title asks how long they could survive, so we should answer as clearly as the uncertainties allow. If the ship is merely a large spacecraft, with stored supplies and partial recycling, the last human might survive months to a few years. If the ship has strong closed-loop life support but limited repair capability, they might survive several years to perhaps a decade, assuming no major medical crisis. If the ship has robust agriculture, high water recovery, stable air processing, good radiation shielding, and manageable maintenance, survival could reach multiple decades. If the ship is designed as a true autonomous habitat with advanced medical care and self-repairing infrastructure, the theoretical upper limit could be the person's natural lifespan. But the most honest answer is not a single number. It is this. There is also the problem of fire. On Earth, fire is frightening because it spreads. On a spacecraft, fire is frightening because there is nowhere else to breathe. A generation ship would certainly have fire detection and suppression systems. NASA life support planning already treats fire detection, atmospheric control, ventilation, and waste management as tightly linked parts of keeping a spacecraft habitable. On a ship meant to last for generations, fire systems would need to be far more advanced than anything used in a short mission. They would have to detect smoke early, isolate airflows, shut down electrical circuits, remove toxic gases, and protect the crew from both flames and the chemicals used to stop them. For a full crew, fire is an emergency. For the last human, it might be a death sentence even if the flames are small. Imagine a minor electrical fire in an equipment bay. The automatic system extinguishes it. The compartment survives. But now there is residue on panels, damaged insulation, compromised wiring, and air that must be filtered. A team could clean it, inspect it, test it, and replace parts. One person could do some of that, but not quickly across a large ship. If the fire damages a system that supports the habitat core, the survivor may have to work in a suit, in poor visibility, with limited tools, while the ship tries to protect the rest of the air supply. Smoke is not just unpleasant in space, it is chemistry inside the lungs. Burned plastic, insulation, lubricant, wiring, and composite materials can release toxic compounds. A survivor might put out the fire and still lose weeks of health afterward. Filters might need replacing. Ventilation might spread traces through ducts. Sensors might remain suspicious for days. In a closed habitat, every contamination event has an afterlife. This is why cleanliness becomes survival too. Dust, mold, oils, shed skin cells, plant debris, and microbial films would slowly gather in places the last human cannot inspect. Every day. A ship with many people would have dedicated cleaning cycles and maintenance crews. A ship with one person would have triage. Clean the air intakes first. Sterilize water connections next. Watch the food systems. Ignore cosmetic dirt. Seal off spaces that smell wrong. Trust sensors, but verify when possible. Over years, the ship's biology could become one of its strangest enemies. Microbes are not evil. They are part of life. A closed habitat would need useful bacteria for waste processing, plant growth, possibly food production, and human health. But useful does not mean predictable forever. Microbial communities change. They adapt. They colonize surfaces. They respond to humidity, temperature, nutrients, radiation, cleaning chemicals, and human behavior. The last human is not alone in the literal biological sense. They are surrounded by invisible life that can help them or harm them. A clogged biofilter might reduce air quality. A contaminated water loop could cause illness. A fungal outbreak in a crop bay could threaten food production. An antibiotic-resistant infection could become dangerous if medical options are limited. A generation ship would have laboratories to monitor these things, but laboratories require reagents, calibration, sterile technique, and interpretation. A diagnostic screen might tell the survivor that a bacterial population has shifted. It might recommend a treatment, but the survivor still has to carry it out correctly, while tired, frightened, and responsible for everything else. Then, there is information decay. People imagine a future ship filled with perfect computers, but data is physical. It lives in hardware. Hardware degrades. Radiation flips bits. Memory cells fail. Cables crack. Storage systems need redundancy and checking. Software can become incompatible with replacement hardware. Encryption keys can be lost. Interfaces can break. A repair manual is useful only if it can still be opened, understood, and applied. The last human might face a crisis where the knowledge exists somewhere on the ship, but reaching it becomes a puzzle. A manual stored in an archive server might be behind a failed authentication module. A tutorial might require a training simulator that no longer boots. A diagram might refer to parts by names from an older design revision. An AI assistant might know the procedure, but depend on sensors that now give conflicting readings. In that situation, survival becomes archaeology. The survivor digs through layers of their own civilization, trying to understand the intentions of engineers who died before they were born. They might read old comments in maintenance logs. They might compare diagrams to physical parts. They might learn which instructions are outdated by looking at scorch marks, patches, handwritten notes, and emergency modifications made by earlier crews. A ship that survives long enough becomes historical. Even while people are aboard, it accumulates past versions of itself. The last human lives inside all of them. This creates another kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of empty rooms, but the loneliness of being the only interpreter. If a system was modified by a long-dead engineer, the survivor cannot ask why. If a warning was disabled 20 years earlier, they may not know whether it was a safe adjustment or a desperate shortcut. If a pipe is labeled incorrectly, they may have to decide whether to trust the label, the diagram, or the evidence in front of them. Bad documentation can kill. So can too much documentation. A frightened person staring at 1,000,000 pages of technical archives may not be saved by knowledge if they cannot find the right sentence in time. The ship might try to help by using artificial intelligence. An advanced onboard system could summarize procedures, identify failures, recommend priorities, and simulate outcomes. It might become the closest thing the survivor has to mission control, but even that raises a troubling question. What if the AI is wrong? Not malicious, just wrong. A sensor could be faulty, a model could be outside its design assumptions. The ship could recommend preserving a mission objective when the survivor needs to preserve their body. It could ask for repairs that are technically optimal, but physically impossible for one person. It could produce calm instructions while the person is bleeding, nauseous, or half asleep. Trust becomes complicated when the only advisor is part of the system that is failing. The survivor may need to argue with the ship. They may override safety locks. They may disable automated routines that protect equipment but threaten human survival. They may choose short-term life over long-term mission integrity. A full crew could debate those decisions. A captain, engineer, doctor, botanist, and ethicist might disagree, and the disagreement itself would reveal blind spots. One person has only their own judgment. That may be enough for a while. It may even be decisive in emergencies, but over decades, self-correction becomes fragile. The question of embryos or sleeping passengers makes the scenario even heavier. Some generation ship concepts. Imagine cryogenic storage, embryo banks, or future reproductive systems. If such systems exist, the last human might not technically be the last possible human. They might be the last active caretaker of dormant future lives. That would change everything. If there are viable embryos, the survivor has to decide whether preserving them is more important than preserving themselves. If there are sleeping crew members, they may have to decide whether waking someone is mercy, necessity, or murder by circumstance. If artificial womb systems exist but require enormous resources, starting a new generation alone might be impossible, reckless, or morally unbearable. A child born into a dying ship, with one adult and no community, would not solve the tragedy. It could deepen it. Survival is not just producing a body that breathes. It is creating a world where that body can become a person. A generation ship understands this when it has a society. With only one adult left, reproduction becomes less like hope and more like a burden no child should inherit. So the last human might protect the possibility without using it. They might keep embryos cold. They might maintain genetic libraries. They might preserve instructions for a future that requires more help than they can provide. They might write warnings beside the protocols. Not yet. Not alone. Those choices would not be scientific only. They would be moral acts, performed in a place where no court, family, council, or culture remains to judge them. This is another way the ship strips life down to essentials. On Earth, ethics is social. It grows from relationships, consequences, shared rules, arguments, laws, grief, love, and memory. Alone in deep space, ethics becomes what a person does when no one can stop them and no one may ever know. The last human's character becomes part of the life support system. Will they preserve the dead with care? Will they keep accurate records even when the truth hurts? Will they use resources only for comfort, or for the possibility that the ship may still matter later? Will they shut down archives to save heat, or freeze themselves to keep memory alive? There may be no correct answer. There may only be costs. Communication would not rescue them. A generation ship between stars may still transmit. It might send tight beam signals back toward the sun or forward toward the destination system. But distance turns communication into ritual. If the ship is several light years from Earth, a message takes years to arrive. If it is dozens of light years away, it takes decades. If centuries have passed since launch, Earth may not be listening in the same way. Frequencies may have changed. Political structures may have changed. The home civilization may have forgotten, transformed, or died. Even if Earth replies, the last human may not live long enough to receive the answer. So communication becomes a message in a bottle. The survivor might continue transmitting because stopping would feel like admitting total separation. They might send system reports, personal logs, scientific observations, and final testimonies. They might compress the archive of the ship and broadcast it in repeating loops. They might aim messages toward the destination star, toward Earth, toward nearby systems, or simply outward. No reply is required for the act to matter. Broadcasting says, "This happened." It says, "We were here." It says, "Someone remained conscious in the dark and chose to speak." But speaking without response can also become painful. Every transmission reminds the survivor that the universe allows signals to travel, but does not promise listeners. Radio waves can cross emptiness forever, thinning with distance, carrying a human voice into regions where no ear will ever exist. That is deep space in its purest form. Not hostility, indifference. Indifference is harder to hate than danger. A storm can be feared, a predator can be fought, a fire can be extinguished, but deep space does not attack the ship. It simply offers no help. It lets warmth leak away. It lets radiation pass through. It lets distance stretch every hope until it becomes abstract. The last human would live with that fact every day. And still, there would be moments of beauty, not the easy beauty of blue skies or oceans, but a colder, stranger beauty. The stars outside would be sharp. The Milky Way might appear with a clarity no atmosphere can offer. If the ship has telescopes, the survivor could watch distant galaxies, nebulae, supernovas, and worlds around other suns. They might become the loneliest astronomer who ever lived. The universe would be visible and unreachable at the same time. That contradiction might sustain them for a while. Looking outward could remind them that the ship's tragedy is not the whole cosmos. Stars are still forming somewhere. Planets still orbit. Light from ancient events still arrives. The survivor's personal world may be shrinking, but the universe beyond the hull remains immense. Yet even beauty can become unbearable when it never changes enough. Stars are too far to move noticeably in a human lifetime. The view may remain almost fixed. The ship moves fast by human standards and slowly by galactic standards. A person could spend decades aboard and still feel as if the outside sky has barely shifted. This is why destination matters. Psychologically, a journey needs signs of progress. Without them, time becomes circular. The survivor wakes, repairs, eats, sleeps, and wakes again under the same star field. A map might show motion. The body might not feel it. That gap between knowledge and experience is another quiet danger. Humans did not evolve to emotionally understand light years. We can calculate them, we can describe them, we can animate them on screens. But inside the nervous system, distance is still shaped by walking, reaching, hearing, smelling, seeing another person across a room. A generation ship asks a primate mind to live inside astronomical numbers. The last human would have to make those numbers personal, maybe by marking anniversaries, maybe by naming milestones, maybe by measuring the ship's distance from the sun, then from every familiar planet, then from the heliopause, then from the nearest known stars. Maybe by creating ceremonies for impossible scales. At 10 light years, they might play every recorded language from Earth. At 20, they might open a sealed message from the founding crew. At 30, they might plant the last rare seeds. Rituals do not fix life support, but they can keep a person oriented when physics offers no human landmarks. There is one more practical question that rarely appears in the fantasy version. What does the last human do with the dead? A generation ship would have procedures for death because no multi-century vessel could pretend everyone would survive the journey. Bodies might be recycled, respectfully, preserved, cremated, stored, or processed in ways meant to return material to the closed ecology. That sounds cold from the outside, but in a sealed world, atoms matter. Water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and trace elements are not symbolic resources. They are the ingredients of future food, future soil, and future bodies. For a community, ritual can surround that process. For one person, ritual becomes much harder. The last human may have to handle the remains of people they loved, people they resented, people they failed to save, or people who once represented the continuation of the mission. If the ship's ecology depends on recycling biological matter, refusing to do it may cost survival time. Doing it may cost emotional stability. The procedure could be scientifically rational and still feel impossible. That kind of burden would change the answer again. A person may have enough food, air, and power, yet be damaged by the acts required to keep those supplies available. Closed-loop survival is not clean. It asks life to feed life inside a boundary that cannot import much from outside. Earth does this gently because the planet is vast, layered, and full of cycles older than memory. Soil hides decay. Rain moves minerals. Forests turn death into growth without forcing one person to operate the machine. A generation ship has to make the cycle visible, mechanical, and personal. The last human would know exactly what everything costs. A bowl of vegetables might contain nutrients recovered from waste, ash, compost, dead roots, processed urine, and filtered humidity. That is not disgusting in a scientific sense. It is how matter works. But psychologically, knowing the cycle too clearly can make every meal feel like part of the ship's accounting system. Survival would require accepting that nothing on the ship is separate. Air becomes water. Water becomes plants. Plants become food. Food becomes breath, waste, movement, repair, and thought. Thought becomes decisions that keep the cycle intact. The last human is not living inside a machine. They are living inside a loop. And if the loop breaks, the deep space outside does not offer a replacement. The last human could survive only as long as the weakest essential system remains recoverable by one person. That system might be mechanical, it might be biological, it might be psychological, it might be the body, it might be hope. This is different from asking how long the ship could survive. The vessel itself might remain intact for thousands or millions of years. Its hull could drift between stars long after its gardens freeze, its water solidifies, its computers sleep, and its air escapes into tanks or emptiness. Metal can outlast breath. A dead ship can keep moving. The human part is temporary. That is what gives the scenario its strange sadness. A generation ship is built around continuity. It is supposed to turn distance into heritage. Grandparents leave Earth. Children grow up between stars. Grandchildren learn the destination sky. Generations pass the mission forward until arrival becomes not a dream, but a place outside the windows. The last human breaks that chain. They are not the beginning of a new world. They are the end of the old one in miniature. Still, the ending does not have to be meaningless. There are different ways to survive when rescue is impossible. One is biological survival, measured in pulse, oxygen saturation, hydration, calories, and body temperature. Another is operational survival, measured in working systems and completed repairs. Another is cultural survival, measured in records preserved, messages left, names remembered, and choices made with dignity when no audience is guaranteed. The last human might fail biologically and still succeed culturally. They might leave the ship more organized than they found it. They might preserve archives. They might protect embryos, seeds, recordings, or instruments. They might direct the vessel toward a stable trajectory. They might make sure that if anything ever finds the ship, it will understand that the people aboard did not simply vanish. Someone remained. Someone tried. Someone kept the lights on as long as they could. That possibility changes the emotional shape of the final days. Suppose the survivor realizes the end is approaching. Perhaps oxygen production is still working. but food reserves are nearly gone, or the water system is failing beyond repair, or illness has advanced past the point where medicine can help, or the person is very old and understands that the ship will soon be empty. What would they do? They might move to the observation deck. If it still holds pressure, they might play the oldest recordings. They might send a final transmission toward Earth, knowing Earth will never hear it in time, or may not exist as the same world by the time the signal arrives. They might write a final log, not as a distress call, but as a closing entry. The message would not need to be dramatic. It might simply state the date by the ship's clock, the systems still active, the names of the dead, the last known trajectory, and a final thought about the stars. Then the ship would continue. That continuation is almost unbearable to imagine. The body stops, but the vessel moves on. No funeral, except momentum. No grave, except a trajectory through the Milky Way. No weather to erase footprints, because there were never footprints outside. No soil to receive anything. Just a ship carrying the last room where a human mind once tried to remain awake. Over time, the habitat would cool if power failed. Air would stop circulating. Plants would die. Microbial systems would collapse or enter dormant states. Water might freeze in pipes or collect in cold traps. Batteries would drain. Displays would go black. Doors might remain sealed for longer than any civilization has existed. The ship would become quiet in the deepest possible way. Outside, nothing would notice. Stars would continue burning. Interstellar dust would strike the hull, grain by grain. Cosmic rays would pass through metal and memory. The galaxy would rotate. If the ship passed near another star tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years later, it might do so without any living eye to see it. A planet could hang nearby, blue or red or frozen white, and the ship would drift past like a seed that arrived after it could no longer grow. That may be the most haunting answer to the question. The last human might survive for decades in the best imaginable version. The ship might survive far longer, but the dream the ship was built to carry would survive only if there is more than one person, more than one generation, more than one fragile mind trying to hold up an artificial world. A generation ship is not truly a ship because of its engines. It is a ship because people keep handing the future to one another. When that handoff ends, the vessel becomes something else. A shelter, a tomb, a museum, a message, a moving ruin. And maybe, in the final analysis, the last human could survive on a generation ship for as long as the machinery, biology, and mind remain aligned. Not forever, not for centuries under normal human limits. Perhaps years if the ship is wounded. Perhaps decades if it is healthy. Perhaps one full lifetime if it is nearly miraculous. But never long enough to turn solitude back into civilization. That is the boundary no life support system can cross. A machine can recycle air. It can purify water. It can grow food. It can warm a room. It can calculate a course through interstellar darkness. It can even preserve voices from the dead. But it cannot make one person into a generation. So the last human survival would be both an engineering problem and a human tragedy. The engineering asks how long the systems can keep working. The tragedy asks what survival means when there is no one left to inherit it. And somewhere between those two answers, inside a quiet ship moving through deep space, the final human being would keep listening to the fans, checking the gauges, tending the plants, repairing what could still be repaired, and leaving records for a future that may never arrive. That is how long they could survive. Until the ship fails. Until the body fails. Until the mind can no longer carry the silence. Or, in the rarest and most merciful version, until a natural life reaches its end inside the last warm room of a world that was built to cross the stars.